What I learned today is that emotions have two sides. So they can help us actually to cooperate, they can help us in decision making, but they have a negative side as well.
Absolutely,
yeah. How do you see that?
They are very useful in spite of what we think. They are very useful in decision making, our own decision making, individual decision making, in two ways. One of these is the concept of intuition. Intuition requires an emotional experience. And if you try to remember, you obviously will recall a situation when you met somebody and you couldn't remember who the person is, you couldn't remember where you saw him the first time, you couldn't remember his name, you couldn't remember his profession, but what you could very vividly remember is whether the experience was positive or negative, whether he was a nice guy or an arrogant one, whether he was somebody who you like talking to, who is interesting, or a boring guy. And this is because this information is stored as an emotional information, which is much easier to retrieve, okay? And it is obviously more important information than just knowing where you met him or just knowing what the name of the person. For the purpose of deciding whether you want to cooperate with the person, these are more significant bits of information than anything else. And this is how emotions, or the capability of experiencing emotion, help us in assessing who we are standing in front, who should we engage, who should we trust, who should we form collaboration with. The other aspect of emotion is that emotions serve as a commitment device, okay? And there's some interesting experiments that show that people who are capable of getting insulted, for instance, or getting a little bit angry in bargaining, manage to do better in bargaining. And the reason is that if you are perfectly rational, if you are motivated only by rationality, only by the outcome and not by anything else, if you are completely immune to emotions, it's very easy for the other party to exploit you, right? For instance, it will generate a situation where you must accept a low offer, okay? And you will be compelled to accept it. But if you're capable of saying, listen, I know that I'm worse off financially by walking out of the negotiation than accepting your humiliating offer, in spite of this, I'm not in a mental state for accepting this offer. This actually provides you with a strategic advantage that forbids the other party to exploit you. I think one instance, real life instance in which it was revealed, was during the negotiations between Obama administration and Iran over the term of the agreement about the nuclear capability of Iran. And if you recall this situation, there was one instance where the Iranians said, the American would not get us down on our knees. Okay? We have principle and God is with us. Okay? This was a very emotional reaction. People were really surprised that they're putting it in front. And consequently, Obama's reaction was, we are not going to get the Iranian on their knees, right? We are going to treat them well, okay? So he was actually compelled to react to this threat that we are not going to accept any offer by making a much more generous offer than he would have done otherwise, okay? They played it very smartly. He played it not very smartly, I think.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes in a business context, out of the management book, you learn cool down your emotions and then negotiate. Yeah. So this is another strategy, right? Or this is a contradiction.
Cool down the emotion is good in a way of assessing what the other party incentives are, okay? To the extent that you can think to focus more rigorously on the other person incentives when you are not angry, this is right. But for the purpose of affecting the other party's way of dealing with you, I think a little bit, and I would never recommend an exaggerated emotional reaction, because emotional reaction can come from both sides, right? If the other party perceives your emotional reaction to be over proportion, yeah, unbased and ridiculous, the other party will react emotionally as well, and then you find yourself in a bad situation as well. Okay. But an emotional reaction which is moderate and assertive in a way of saying to the other party, you know, if you try to push me really to the corner, it won't work because my mental state will not allow it to won't allow it to happen. This is something that could be useful. And it's also, let me say that it's also a matter, you know, the level of an emotional reaction in strategic environment depends very much on culture. There are countries, there are societies in which an emotional reaction is more legitimate, okay?
For example?
Let's say Middle East, Israel, for example, where I'm coming from, okay? It is less legitimate, I would say, although now things are changing, but it would be less legitimate in a place like this, in Switzerland. Okay, but what we should understand is the only thing it says is that the level of the reaction should be different between, let's say, Israel and Switzerland, but the strategy itself or the usefulness of an emotional involvement is very important. The other way in which emotions are useful, for instance, in negotiation, is by trying to convince the other party about the attractiveness of your offer. Let me just give you an example. Suppose you are selling a car, okay? And you want to convince the buyer to go ahead with the deal, right? There are usually two strategies you can use. You can either tell the other party, the buyers, that the car in the market is valued more than what you're pricing it, and the condition of the car is excellent. Some of these evidences are easy to check, some of them are not, especially what the condition of the car. But if you genuinely can transmit the message, listen, I used the car for a year or two, and I really enjoy driving it. You can't fake it, but if this is genuinely what you feel about the car, this could be a message that the other person will recognize as credible and as useful, which might be more effective than concrete information that you are coming with.
Great.
And it's an emotional reaction.
So we can use our emotions. Can we use our emotions also in the fight against populism, which is on the rise? And this is
what I very often say is that the emotions treat us well and drive us to make good decisions in individual decision making, but not so much in politics. Okay? And the main reason for it is that in politics we are very much affected by what we call in-group favoritism, out-group hate. The pattern of behavior that we display in politics is very much group type of behavior. We usually vote for the same party that our friends are voting for, our family members are voting for, our socioeconomic class is voting for. We rarely go outside of our social network and vote for something which is not within our social network. And what it causes is that we want to conform with our friends, okay? and it's an emotional reaction. We want to please our friend, we want to please our social group, and by doing it, we ignore a lot of information. We use the same outlet that support our original view. If I'm left-wing or I'm Democrat in the US, I would read only the New York Times. If I'm Republican, I'll watch Fox News, okay? But I'll never move from one outlet to another. And this is bad because we are, each of us is getting only half of the picture, okay? And consequently, many of us are voting uninformed and not on the basis of what's good for us, even as individuals.
So if I follow this, I should not trust my emotions if it comes to elections?
This is one thing, but what I would recommend people to do, you know, we often think about egoism or self-interest as something bad. You should not be self-interest. You should think about what others need. And but I think in the way of voting in politics, actually allowing people to be self-interested and vote for the party that represents them, for the party that their interests are aligning with the party's platform, is the right thing. If you tell people to vote for what's good for them, not what good's for the country, for instance, vote for what's good for you, okay? Then there's more chance that they will focus on the evidence rather than being triggered by emotions that have nothing to do with what's good for them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned this in-group, out-group, that this is often problematic. Is there a positive side as well?
Well, in-group, out-group concerns basically all altruistic behavior that human beings are displaying. And some of this is very essential for society to survive. Our need to help each other, our need to contribute to our community, to have solidarities with people live around us, they are all coming from in-group, out-group. But the same forces that drive us to display this very, very nice, very, very beautiful behavior also drive us to the most nastiest type of behaviors possible, which is killing people or willing to kill people in war or in conflicts or doing or harming people in very different ways, right? Harming people financially and harming people psychologically. All these come from the same forces that I believe are evolutionary, that are coming from the way we developed as human beings since hunt and gather time, where we had to form groups in order to survive. Okay, we had to, on one hand, to cooperate with some people in order to manage to search and hunt what we need to survive, and on the other hand, to compete with other people so that we have enough resources for ourselves. These are actually forces that affected our mentality through genes, first of all, but also through nurture, through the way we were educated. We have to accept it. I think the only thing we can aspire to do is to make sure that the positive aspects of these in-group, out-group effect will be amplified, and the negative effect will be as possible, diminished as possible.
Yeah, you have some really concrete examples or experiments you mentioned how to cope with this. The one experiment where, for example, the left-wing groups were exposed to Fox News and things. Can you explain a little bit about this?
This is not my experiment. This is some experiments were done by others, but one way to potentially to reduce this in-group, out-group in negative effect in terms of politics is to offer free access to, for instance, Democrats to see Fox News and free access for Republican people to read the New York Times. This won't change people's views. Okay, they'll remain Republican and they will remain Democrats. However, people will develop some sort of empathy toward the other group. And this is even more important than changing your mind. Because once you have empathy to the counter group, this is the necessary condition. This is the starting point to break this barrier between these groups. Okay? Because if you feel empathy to somebody on the other group, you incorporate this person, or you incorporate yourself into the other person group. And then you make this borderline between the group much blurred, much more ambiguous. And this is a chance for merging of ideas, merging of ideologies to the extent that we reduce the negative effect of out-group hate.
Eyal, thank you very much for the interview. Thank you.
Thank you.